Hi, my name is Hananya.
Hello there, my name is Shameen.
And my name is Leslie. We're three international friends on a mission to write and publish our first novels. We are the Three Writing Amigas. Hello, Shaneem.
Hello.
Hello.
That's my best Welsh accent.
Do it again. I missed that. Do it again.
Hello, Shameem.
It's not terrible, but
How'd I sound?
oh god.
That sounds a bit English more than well.
So what is the difference? I mean, there are differences, I know. But I mean, how would you characterize the difference between a Welsh and a British accent?
So you just said hello. So it's like hello, whereas Welsh would be hello. Hello.
Oh. So
Like okay.
Yeah.
Hello, Shamim.
Yeah.
Hello.
That's dark. You sound like Dracula a bit.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do what you're telling me to do.
I know. It's hard to do it on the spot.
Yeah.
Like,
well, first of all, see, I'm from not only the States, but from California. And we say we don't have an accent.
Sure.
Which Hananya just did
No
in her best California. I swear she's, the American accent comes out. Should be Hananya when you're not paying attention. You just totally dissed me in Californian.
I missed all the action.
I'm going to practice it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see.
The Californian or the Welsh?
No, I am Californian. So I'm going to practice.
I was going to say,
the Welsh
are you going to practice that?
Well, considering Leslie said that Welsh people sound like fairies,
Sure.
I'm still like,
but only when they speak Welsh, not.
Okay.
I mean,
promising episode. This is going to be.
Yeah, I don't know. So I have no glasses on.
I know. I noticed.
So, and I just came from my eye doctor again to get tested because it's a week after the first surgery, and everything's great. And she said, you know how you do like one eye and then you do the other eye, and so I can see very well, like 20/15 out of my right eye, and I'm still completely so blind in my left. But together, this is the thing about the brain or the eye, whatever.
Yeah.
Together, I am 20/20. Now, I don't feel it because I feel the blur on this side where they haven't corrected my vision yet. And so it's disconcerting to me, even though I'm seeing everything. But it's just interesting. It's just crazy town. I don't know. So my reading glasses, I can read little things like the name of our guest today.
Nice.
Look at that. So I'm very happy.
Lauren.
Yes. So, if we talk about that just quickly, Lauren Humphries-Brooks.
Remind me, how did you find Lauren?
I was, looking online. I looked at, Writer's Digest they have great articles about, which lit agents or which editors are looking, all that kind of stuff. So it was really I wanted to make sure I found, or at least I was trying to make sure I found, an editor that kind of dealt with all three of our books. So she does literature as well as romance. And I just wanted someone who kind of was well-rounded, since we have, although we know we found this core, these strong women core of our stories, we're in different genres, and I wanted to make sure that I could find someone that I thought could be helpful to all of us. And I think she's got a really great background. And so I was just looking, through stuff like that, and then sent out an email, and she responded and said, asked a little bit more, and I told her to check us out and gave her the link and and then she surprisingly, I don't know, came back and said, sounds like fun.
Yay.
And I was like, yeah, that's what we want. Someone who thinks this will be fun, and it'll just be a conversation. And hopefully we can get some of our questions answered, because we've not worked with, or I don't know, Hananya, have you ever worked with a professional literary editor?
For the anthology, yeah.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So, but that was your first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was also a very short experience because it was literally just fixing typos, and that was it.
Right. Okay. Ready?
Yes.
Here comes Lauren.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet
Nice
you
to meet you.
too. We're very excited to have you today and to be able to talk. I'm just going to give a really quick intro so that everyone knows, especially listening, who we're talking to today.
Okay, good.
Lauren Humphries-Brooks is our guest today, and she has been a freelance editor since 2015. She has a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Edinburgh. Hopefully said that correctly. Shamim will get on me if I didn't. And she's also a published author. So welcome to the podcast, Lauren.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. We're going to jump right in. I was looking through your bio, and one of the things that struck me, and I want to read the quote so I get it right. So one of the things that struck me is that you wrote, quote, "I believe that a good editor works for the good of the author."
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. But what do you mean by that?
I mean that the goal, I think, of a good editor is not to impose my voice on the manuscript. It's to help the author craft their voice. So I think that this is true for most editors, to be honest, that our goal is not to like rewrite someone's piece for them or to kind of be like, you have to do it this way because it's the way that I say is best, but more to really consider what the author is trying to do with their work and to help them build their voice and kind of see where where they can build up the structure that they already have, where they can strengthen those things, and also where their weaknesses are and where they actually do need to work. So a lot of it is about creating a balance for the author and being certain that the author is happy with what you're coming out with. It isn't my text. It's not the book that I would write, because most of the books that I work on personally are not the books that I would write because they're someone else's,
Right. I mean, that's interesting because I just went through the beta reader round.
Mm-hmm.
Hananya has had beta readers. Shamim hasn't yet. So we're terrified.
I'm avoiding it. I'm in avoidance mode for beta readers at the minute.
And for me, at least, I had like a, kind of a little bit of a roller coaster where I think some people were in your camp, not like explicitly, but just based on the kind of feedback I got. But then I got two that it was like, they just didn't like how I attacked my book. And it was really hard to take that feedback. I mean, it was almost more like criticism than critique.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to beta readers, it's even harder. So as I do some beta reading, but really that comes down to feedback, right? It's, do I like this?
Right.
At some level, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. And there's a little bit of that in editing, because editing is subjective. Like I can't go into it and say, like, I've worked on manuscripts before that I've been like, I don't actually like this,
right.
But I can still help you work on it, and I can still help you craft it, because this is the kind of stuff that you want to write. I have my own opinions about literature, etc.
Right.
But that does definitely come into editing, I think. But when it comes to beta reading, it's hard, and that's why you have to find people that you kind of trust, and you also have to know when maybe you're just like, well, this particular person is responding to something that they want this book to be a different book, basically. Yeah. And you get at a certain point, you might just need to simply ignore that, or dismiss it, or at least put it to the side and say, like, I'll think about it another time. If you keep on getting feedback like that this book is going in one direction and it should be going in another, then you might want to consider, going back to it and saying, like, oh, maybe actually that there's a point here. But if you're just getting that from one or two people, and it seems to be very subjective, then my attitude is always like, go in the direction that you think is best. And also consider who you're actually getting to beta read your stuff, because you want someone that you trust. And not only that, you want someone who's kind of on your wavelength. I think that's right. And that can be hard to find, particularly if your beta readers are people that are your friends or, family members, et cetera. You want them to like it, but you also want to be certain that they know what you're going for and they understand what you're going for. And if they don't, they're probably not the right people for it.
Right. So how would you describe then, because you're an editor, you're not a beta reader, like you said, so, for me, or any of us writers, how would you describe what you do that is different than the beta readers?
There's a lot of overlap. A lot of it is simply, it's not simply feedback. So beta reading tends to be, like I say, I like this, I don't like this.
Right.
Editing, particularly when it comes to developmental editing, is going in a lot deeper and is considering, this works and this is why it works. This doesn't work, and here is how you can fix it. A lot of beta reading, I think that some beta readers kind of slide into editing because it's almost impossible not to, where you're like, well, if you just did this, I think it would improve it. But an editor, first of all, I'm coming at it from, more of a professional standpoint. I'm considering, what the manuscript is at a somewhat objective level. Not, like I say, everything is subjective when it comes to literature. And I'm sort of approaching it going like, okay, this is what you have. How can we work together to improve it? Where are the places that, your narrative voice isn't working, your structure isn't working, you have issues with point of view, with perspective, it goes along really well, but then the ending just flies off the rails and we need to work on the ending. Everything is really good up until the middle part, like the opening is great, and then the middle just doesn't work. You need to work on, climactic structure, all of those sorts of things. So I think that that's where editing ultimately just goes a lot deeper than just, I liked it, I didn't like it, I like this phrase, I don't like this phrase. Because that's part of editing is also, I like this phrase, but it doesn't work here.
Gotcha.
Right.
Or I like this phrase, but you have too many of them. I've worked on manuscripts where the writer is fantastic, but they write like 15 different metaphors in a string. And I come to it, I'm like, all of these are good metaphors. They're well written. They're really evocative. But you got to choose one.
Right. Pick one.
Yeah, exactly.
If I can ask.
Oh, no, go on.
Sorry. I was going to say, if I can ask a follow-up question on the developmental editing side. There's obviously different editing that is offered. So you have like developmental editing, line editing, copy editing. Can you explain a little bit like what the differences are and maybe like at what point you should get what? Because that is always something that I always go back to. Like, how do I determine what I need?
Yeah. So there's a lot of in more industry jargon, and developmental editing is also often called content editing. And that's usually where you're looking at a first or maybe a second draft of a manuscript.
Okay.
That someone has written it and is kind of like, okay, I like what I have here, but I know that it really needs work. And that's primarily when I do it. Different editors are different about how they approach different types of editing. When it comes to developmental or content editing, most of my edits are basically commentary. So it's going through the manuscript, looking at structure, looking at narrative voice, looking at all of the content related issues, right? And it varies a lot from manuscript to manuscript. So it could be that the characterizations are really strong, but there's no real plot to hang them on. It could be that the structure is really strong, but the characterizations just aren't, hitting right. There are all sorts of kind of approaches that you can take to it. And it's very individual to the manuscript. So most of what I do when it comes to developmental editing is giving feedback and giving actionable feedback. So you have an issue with structure. Here's how we can rearrange the chapters. Here's what might be missing. Here's, the climax is coming too soon. You need to elongate it a little bit, all of those things that you can approach with the various issues of content, basically. And so there's a lot more, I think, back and forth when it comes to developmental editing. Usually what I do is I go through the entire manuscript. I make comments, I give feedback, I give examples. If there's a particular issue that is recurring throughout the manuscript, I'll give an example and say, like, I can give more. But I don't want to overburden the author as well, because it can be very demoralizing if you get back a manuscript that's just covered in commentary.
Yeah.
And then after that, I usually include an edit letter with in talking with people. So kind of giving general feedback, saying, here's what you're doing really well. Here's what you need to work on. Let's talk about it. And then basically there's a good bit of back and forth, either via email, phone, et cetera, going back and forth, discussing whatever the issues happen to be and how the author can approach them. So that's developmental or content editing. And that broadly, that's what most editors are going to be looking at.
Yeah.
When it gets to something smaller, you're doing something like line editing, which is often referred to as stylistic editing. So it's the individual line changes. And If there are structural or characterization issues, I'm not looking at the overall arc anymore. I'm assuming that the arc is already there, that it's been fixed. So usually if I'm working with an author for the first time and they come to me and say, like, I like my story, but I don't know if it works, the first thing I'm going to say is do developmental edit, because you want to get those content issues addressed immediately. Because if you are not confident in your structure, and I look at it as from a line editing perspective, I'm like, okay, it's not there. Like, you need a lot more work than you're asking me to do, basically. So again, some of it is about the level of confidence that the author has. The author might look at it and go, like, I'm happy with this already. I'm happy with the way that I've structured it. I'm happy with the characterizations. I don't want an editor to touch it. And that's fine. But I think that all authors need to be aware that there might be things there that you want an editor to look at before I go into making individual line changes. Because if I'm making individual line changes, I'm not really focusing on your content problems.
Right. Have you had that where someone's come to you and said, oh, yeah, I just need a line edit, and then you've had to, say, you might want to think about some other things?
Yeah, it can be difficult because a lot of the time, I ask for a sample, usually from the beginning of the manuscript. And sometimes it can be difficult to gauge, right? I might look at the sample and be like, oh yeah, sure, this looks great. You have a good idea. Awesome, let's go with that. And then I might get halfway through the manuscript and say, like, oh, you have bigger problems. And I will tell I'm not going to conceal that from the author. I'm not going to say to the author, like, oh no, it's great. I will say to the author, here's what we did. I think you need to work on the structure more. I think that we need to have a conversation about where the manuscript is actually going and the work that needs to be done on it.
So that process to me sounds quite intense. And, also, because I feel like you would have to have a good relationship with your editor, or build a decent relationship, because I don't know, my feelings are that if you didn't get on with that person, or you didn't have some form of connection, it would be really difficult to both give and receive the type of information that's going to be passing backwards and forwards. So I just wanted to take a step back to the beginning of the process, in terms of how do you somebody approaches you, I guess they find your blurb on Readsy and they contact you. How do you go through deciding, right, this is for me, this is not for me? Or do you know what I mean? Like, if you want to work with that particular author.
A lot of it is just interest in the text itself. I will never work with an author that I'm like, I don't care about the project that you're talking about. And so I work with a lot of particularly sci-fi and fantasy authors. That's one of the genres that I really enjoy. So I tend to like working on those sorts of manuscripts. I also understand the genre, and so I'm able to kind of look at it from that the generic perspective, as it were. Usually, I want to at least have a little bit of a conversation with them via messaging with something like Readsy. It's messaging or email. At least to kind of gauge where they're at, the kind of help that they want, and whether or not we would be a good fit. In some ways, it's very much a gamble for both of us, because you don't know at the end of the day, like, it might come out and like, this is not a great working relationship.
Right.
And that can happen. That's something that does happen. And I'm aware of the fact that very often I'm asking people to spend a lot of money on a job that I want to do the best that I can. And I might not be the right editor for it. So I try very hard to gauge that I am the right editor, that I feel confident in it. Regardless of, and that the author is comfortable, kind of understands my process, understands the way that I'm going to approach a manuscript, and knows that, it's a very individual business. Like I say, it's a subjective business in a lot of ways. I'm not going to give them answers. I'm not simply going to say, you're a great writer, you don't have to do anything, but I'm also not going to say you're the worst writer in the world. Never publish anything at all. Like, that's not helpful. That isn't helpful. Some authors honestly want that. They're like, oh, be as mean as you want to be. I'm like, I don't want to be mean. I want to help you. I want to assist you with your work. Right. So yeah, a lot of it is just kind of me trying to gauge what I feel about the manuscript and also what I feel about my communication with the author.
Is there something? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then the author gets to make a choice as well.
Yeah,
Right.
of course. And how long does the development process take for a typical manuscripts? 80,000 words, say.
Usually for developmental edit, it would probably be about 4 to 5 weeks. If you're looking at an average, full length book. If you're looking at something more like 120K or longer than that, then you're pushing a little bit longer. Some of it is also about the issues within the manuscript. I usually assume about 4 to 5 weeks for an average length novel. There might be a point where I will say to the author, this is taking a lot more work than I thought it was going to. I'm going to need more time on it. And then you have a conversation about deadlines and things like that, payments and everything more of the business side. But I think that's reasonable. 4 to 5 weeks is reasonable for a developmental edit. As long as you're talking about something that isn't, overly long, and also shorter, like novellas. If you're written something that's 30,000 words, it's probably going to take less time.
Right.
But part of it is that I want to, take the time to read the book carefully and to be paying attention to everything and not feel like I'm just rushing through it, marking things up, and giving bad advice. I want to have the space to dedicate to the particular manuscript.
Yeah. I want to go back just really quickly, Shamim, to what you were saying about the relationship, because I think for me, at least, it's really important. I'm sure it changes, but what would be your advice to writers, to authors, what is the kind of information that we could give you that would help assess, whether or not you would be a good fit, we'd be a good fit, whatever, that this might be a good relationship? Is there something that you know what I mean? Like, rather than just saying, hey, found you on Readsy, here's my manuscript, here's my, how can we communicate with you as an editor to give you a sense of who we are that would help you to help us? Does that make sense?
One of the things that I try to ask, if an author doesn't give it to me, one of the things I try to ask is, what is your goal with the book? What do you want out of this?
Okay.
Is the goal to improve solely to improve your writing? Is it to be traditionally published, go get an agent? Is it to self-publish? Is this, I've worked with people who they're writing a family memoir and they want to self-publish something that they're going to give to their kids,
Right.
And that also helps me to know how I'm going to approach the text. The other thing is just to be friendly, I guess. be like, like I say, I don't want to use the word smug, but don't make the editor feel like, you're doing them a favor, I guess. Because the whole point here is for this more collaborative relationship. Again, for me personally, that I want to work with someone that I feel comfortable with and that I feel comfortable going back and forth with and asking questions and things like that. Providing information about the manuscript, even, why you wrote it, what you feel it, what niche it fills, your experience as a writer. So if you've done writing workshops, if you've worked with beta readers, if you've been published, if you've not been published, all of those things, like kind of what you're looking to get out of the edit itself. And how, one of the things that I always like is that if a author sees something on like my profile, that says, oh, you worked on X book, this is very similar to that. That's also helpful for me because it says to me like, oh, I really liked working on that. Great. That's good. I will have fun with this manuscript then.
Right.
I think that honestly, just being polite and friendly is one of the most helpful things, and just giving the editor as much information about the work itself as you possibly can. And then ultimately choosing your sample. Being like, this is really, this demonstrates what the book is, right?
Okay.
And
so it's not just the first 2 chapters or 3 chapters necessarily.
It doesn't have to be. No, I very often I ask for like the first couple of chapters, especially if someone wants me to do a sample. So one of the things that I do is I'll do an edit. A sample edit on the first couple of pages. And particularly if it's the opening of the story, that very often one of the first things that jumps out is you don't have a hook, right? You do have a hook. You have a great hook, right? And so that can be very demonstrative for me. But yes, choosing a section of the manuscript that you're like, this really shows, I think, what the manuscript is and what you are going to, if you like the writing here, you're going to like the writing in the rest of the book, something like that.
Right.
But honestly, anything that will kind of introduce the novel to remember that we're readers also. We're like looking for things that we're interested in. And anything that will really introduce that and show what the quality of your writing and kind of where maybe we'll be able to help you the most.
Great.
I think that's really good advice. And I was like chuckling inside my head because I've just finished doing my first edit of my draft this morning. And I realized that my first half of my book is way better. I think the quality is way better than the second half. I have tons of work to do, a lot of work to do, because I think I spent so much time in the first half. When I was writing and editing, I was in this, perpetual cycle that I couldn't get out of, which stopped me from drafting when I should have been drafting. And I could see that plain as day. So I would have to send you like the middle, because that's the worst.
Well, honestly, if you say like, this is the section that I really struggle with, then definitely say, like, tell your editor that. Say like, I think I've got a great beginning and a great ending, but the middle is terrible. Right. Yeah. And it's like, okay, that gives me information. That tells me where I'm going to work on something. Honestly, that's not unusual as well. Like the opening is always the first thing that we work on. Is always the last thing that we work on. And very often, like within edits, you're like, oh, the first half of the book is great, but what happened? Like where did it go wrong, basically? And then by the end of it, the second half of the book is great. And you're like, okay, now we got to work on the first again.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of going back and forth with that. But yeah, like give the editor a good idea about how much work this book is going to be. And, and we don't expect you to know like, oh, you're going to have to spend, all of your time on this book. We don't expect you to assume anything about like how we work. But giving us a good idea of where the writing is at and what kind of work needs to be done on it is very helpful.
About the back and forth, because you say that you will have like a lot of back and forth with the author, right? At what point do you decide this is the cutoff moment? Because you're really taking up too much of my time. You're just going to keep asking me questions. Like, do you ever have that where the author is just like continuously asking you more and more questions? And then you're like, well, maybe it's best if we stop this.
Do you mean with the current client or someone that I'm
just in general? Just in general? If you've had that before?
Yeah, definitely. I think that does happen. And sometimes you definitely get authors that really are very actually lacking in confidence about their own work and feel like they really need someone to kind of hold their hand through it. And that can be helpful. Very, very often what I'll say is, okay, at this point, I'm going to start charging you by the hour, right?
Gotcha.
And so
that's a good
yeah, that's good.
And sometimes authors are fine with that. They're like, oh yeah, sure, absolutely, charge me whatever. Sometimes they're like, okay, like, maybe I will go and work on this and I'll get back to you. It's like,
right.
I do encourage authors to there could be too much editorial input, I think. And at a certain point, it's like you need to go and you need to work on the manuscript and do what you feel you need to do with it. And then come back to me and we can talk about the changes you've made and see where we can go from there. But you need to spend a little bit of time on your own doing the work, because ultimately the editor is not the writer and the editor is not going to write your book for you. And you don't want that at all. You don't want me to be writing your book, because very often it's that kind of thing is just a result of lack of confidence. People feel uncomfortable. They're like, well, I want to be certain I'm doing this right. And ultimately there is no correct way to write, unfortunately, or fortunately, and so there can be this sense of like the editor almost as God or something, right. Where it's like, well, tell me, is this correct? It's just like, I don't know. Like, does it feel right to you?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the way, if that's the way you want to go with it, go for it. Like, try it, see if it works.
Right. Well, that brings up a question for me, because you were saying, so 80,000 words, idea, 4 to 5 weeks. So Can you just sort of talk us through in general, like a sort of what your average kind of structure or process would be? So we agree to work together, and you think it's going to take 4 to 5 weeks. Is it you go away for 4 to 5 weeks and then you come back with notes at the end of that? Or how does that kind of work? And what at the end of that time, whatever it is, should the writer expect to have from you? Is it just a manuscript with notes on it, or do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me personally, again, I work in a particular way. I find it a lot easier if I'm not constantly having the writer going back and forth with the writer while I'm working on the manuscript, in part because I haven't worked on the manuscript yet.
Right.
So I need time to read the manuscript and to think about what I need to say. One of the things that I do is I will read the entire manuscript. I'll read part of the manuscript and I'll make notes in the margins. I'll use track changes usually with Microsoft Word. But very often those notes will literally look like, come back to this, or look at this again. Does this need to be rewritten? Does this pay off later? They're literally questions to myself, and reminders to go back and to look at it after I have worked through more of the manuscript. So that's one of the reasons why I generally will not agree to send back edits chapter by chapter, because what I say after reading the first chapter might be different after I've read the entire book.
Sure.
So that's the way that I work. So for the most part, you're asking, is there a lot of communication between myself and the writer during that time? There's very little, except for me kind of giving them updates saying like, everything's going fine, or saying like, I think we need to have a conversation now. There are issues here that I think need to be addressed at this moment. That doesn't happen a great deal.
Okay.
That's only if I'm coming across something that I think is really problematic, really needs to be looked at immediately. So generally I'm going to give myself like all of those 4 weeks, as it were. And then at the end of that, what I'm going to send back to the author is the marked up manuscript with comments, examples, suggestions, all sorts of things. I'm also going to send back an edit letter, which is going to be general feedback and also things to watch for. So if I notice that there's a lot of use of passive voice or something like that, something smaller, I might mention that. Just be like, you need to watch your writing, watch the way that you phrase things. This is something we could talk about and address later, but just be aware of it. And, and here are the general issues that I saw as I worked through this manuscript. Here are the things we need to talk about, stuff that doesn't pay off, all of those things. And then I always, as a part of the initial developmental edit, I always offer a consultation to have a conversation with the author, whatever they want to talk about. So once they've had a chance to look at my notes and my suggestions, and even if they've had a chance to do some rewrites possibly and to begin working through them, and then they have questions for me, then I always have a consultation after that. At that point, we can then discuss what the next step might be. If there's a lot of rewriting that needs to be done, if they want to do some rewriting and then have me look at what they've worked on so far. Is this working? Is this going in the right direction? And that's also where I think you begin to then get into, again, the business side of like, okay, what does it cost?
Right.
So, and that's always kind of a back and forth conversation a little bit. It depends upon what the manuscript is and things like that. So that's my process. I found that it works really well.
No, that's really helpful, I think, just to get a sense of, what to expect, right? None of us have worked with an editor on our own book at this point. So I think that's really, really helpful. Do my amigas have any other questions?
Yes.
Okay.
I looked at your profile and and let me take a step back. I have noticed since we've started doing this podcast and I've been creating posts as an example, that a lot of some of the posts get a lot of comments if I say like a British word versus an American word. And I noticed in your profile that you specialize in US English and UK English, which made me chuffed, because I just think even though both countries speak English, that's where it starts and that's where it ends. There's loads of differences in culture, understanding, dialect, that type of thing. And you studied, I didn't realize when I read it, I couldn't have picked it up, but you studied in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I actually did my undergraduate at St. Andrews, and then I did one of my graduate programs in Edinburgh. My graduate program in creative writing I did in Edinburgh, and I have to say I don't want to be an advertisement for the University of Edinburgh, but that creative writing program was probably one of the best things I ever did. And in terms of like the way that I approach editing, honestly, my professors there were almost by accident in some ways, like gave me some of the concepts that, I've definitely brought to bear on the editing work that I do, because, writing and editing are very closely allied. Obviously I write and I also understand how to give feedback, and that's how I kind of got into editing. And yeah, so I'm very comfortable with both kinds of English. It's been a while since I've been out of Scotland. But I always ask like my clients just like, okay, what kind of English are you using? Like, do you want, because there are also differences in grammar, and there are certain corrections that I might make. It's like, okay, this is for American audiences, so I'm going to make some of these corrections in grammar just because this is what Americans are going to expect. But generally, like, most of it is interchangeable, though not all the time. And you could definitely say like, okay, this is fine because it's British English, or this is fine, this is American English.
Right. Because I don't know if when you checked us out, I'm in the States, I'm from the States. Shamim is Welsh, and Hananya tells us that she's Dutch, but we don't believe it because her English is so perfect, so we make fun and say that she's a secret American. But in my mind, I speak English, and then Shamim speaks another language sometimes.
Yeah, that's because I say a lot of slang, and you must have had tons of exposure to that, especially in Scotland.
Yes.
Because my story is set in Wales, it's got a very strong Welsh prose, and it's got slang, it's got words that maybe you'd have to be a Brit maybe, or had exposure to somebody that's Welsh to understand it. I just want, and Leslie's story has got a strong prose as well, a very unique voice. And I just wondered, do you have that in the types of books that you edit, where there's local dialect or slang words that are being introduced? Does that upset the kind of rhythm? Or I just wondered what you thought about stories that had that kind of element attached to it.
I mean, I personally have no problem with stories that have slang in it, as long as it's being used correctly and as long as it's clear. Like if you were marketing your book, say in the United States, you'd want to be maybe aware of that, but you don't want to change the slang or be like, this is not the way these people talk, right? They talk the way that they talk. I always think about someone like Irvin Welsh, who is writing in Scotch dialect for huge sections of Trainspotting,
right?
And is almost impossible to understand if you don't actually read it out loud. And then you read it out loud, it's like, oh, I understand. I can process. But it's sometimes I might, if there's one of the interesting things that I've come across is working with European writers and writers whose first language isn't English. And a lot of people from Europe, they learn British English, right? And so, but then they're marketing their books in the United States. In fact, one of the books I'm working on right now is someone who's translated. They've had their work go through a translator who's an English translator and is now marketing their work in the United States. And so there are places where it's like using boot instead of trunk.
And
things like that. And then you begin to get into, well, it's in Europe, but also we wouldn't, in the States, we would probably be able to process that the boot is the trunk, but there are other things that we might not necessarily know. Like, I think that it's less common in the States to understand that the bonnet is the front of the car, right?
Yeah.
And so if you say car bonnet to some people, you're just like, what are you talking about?
Right.
If you say the boot, a lot of people will understand it. So some of that is about balance. But yeah, a lot of it comes down to what the context of the story. So if you're writing a story that's set in Wales, of course, people are going to speak in Welsh slang. There will be different kinds of dialects going on. Some of it is also about making certain that the verisimilitude works. I've read books in dialect that it just doesn't sound right, as it were. and very often that's a result of someone who's not from the locale writing about something that's taking place in the Louisiana Bayou, and it's like that's not how people speak there. That's how people speak there in a Hollywood film, and so there's that kind of discrepancy between it, and then you've got to work on that, like how do we get more of that verisimilitude in, but don't make it seem stereotyped or unnatural.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So we're wondering rather, this is your moment, Lauren, to tell us, like, if there is anything that you would like to tell authors or ask authors when we approach you as an editor, what are we not doing right or not saying to you, or, how best to approach and work with you, something that you'd like us to know that maybe we don't know?
Well, like I said earlier, be friendly, be polite, and I have to say, I very few people are impolite or anything like that. Like, but that is actually very important. And so I think to be aware of that editors are all different. We're all going to have very different approaches. There will be, kind of similarities throughout, like the way that we define certain things will be the same, but what you really want to look for is someone who you feel fits with the work that you're trying to do, and that you're not expecting too much of the editor to be like, so don't expect the editor to rewrite your manuscript. Don't expect them to give you the answer to, this is how you should write. Just be aware of that if you're coming to an editor to hire them, they're going to like really critically look at your work.
Right.
And the goal is not to be, not to tear you down at all, not to tear up the book. It's to be like, okay, here is what's good, and here is where you need to work on this. And that's why you're paying us, if you're going to pay us $1,000 to look at your book, do you really just want us to come back and say, hey, it's great, you don't have to do anything to it, awesome? And because if you do, like, fine, I'm happy to do that. If you just want to send me a manuscript and I respond like, sure, great, wonderful. But that's not the point of editing, right? And that's not going to be helpful to you, because, if you then go to an agent or a publisher or whatever, like, oh, this is the best thing ever. And they're like, well, no, it's not. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you need to work on with this. So I think to be aware that the editor is trying to help you, and to be aware that you are going to get critiqued, there, you are going to get criticism. And the goal there is not, you're a bad writer. It's there are things that need to be worked on. I encourage people to talk to editors and to talk to multiple editors before they decide to employ one. You really do want to find someone who you are comfortable with and you are willing to listen to and to take seriously, and who you think is actually going to treat your work with the respect and the critique that you need.
Fantastic. I mean, thank you so much for all of that. That is exactly the kind of person that we all want to work with, and I think everyone deserves to work with. If I don't, any more thoughts from you guys?
I could probably keep asking questions for hours, but
I know, but I promised her we wouldn't keep her for the rest of her life.
So let's not.
Yeah.
This has really been fun. Let me just tell you, it's been really, really fun. Oh, I wanted to say this before. One of the things when I first discovered you, whatever, ran across you and was looking at your background and all of that, and thought you would be great and hoped that you would do our podcast. Hananya and Shamim asked me, well, why did you pick her? And I said, she seems really nice. So
I try.
Well, no, it's true. Like I like the quote in the beginning and everything. And so I just want to say, from our perspective, also being nice is a really big deal. So
good.
It goes a long way. Yeah. Thank you again, Lauren, so much for spending your time with us. It's been illuminating, and we're just really, really grateful. And to anyone out there who's listening or watching us, please note that you can find Lauren Humphries-Brooks on nonplussed-editing.com. That's nonplussed-editing.com, which is her website. And you can also find her through Readsy. And we, of course, will put all the links below so that you can give her a shout out if you are looking for an editor. And thank you again. So it's been really great to spend time with you.
It's been lovely. Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, take care. I think that was really fun.
That was so good.
So
like I said, I feel like I could ask so many more questions.
Oh, I know.
She was very good at like explaining things and like really taking charge of the question. That was awesome.
I feel like I know how to approach an editor now. First of all, why do I need an editor? And when do I need the editor? And then how to approach them and what to expect. I mean, but it's just interesting. I feel like, because it always was kind of a mystery to me in a way. Like, you know?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of it's time intensive. I mean, Lauren's job is time. And I'm just thinking how long it's taken me to to edit my own book, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that I'm already quite intimate and familiar with.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, she's immersing herself into all of those million different elements in order to provide constructive and actionable feedback, which is really hard. Yeah. And so 4 to 5 weeks. It's not that long, really.
It's not that long.
No,
like that's a month.
Yeah. Right.
That's really not that long.
Gives her a chance to, you know, like she said, she reads it through and then goes back and gives you, you know, that's intense. So, you know, anyway, that was really fun. I'm glad we did that.
And
me too.
Well done.
For all of us, yes, we learned a lot. So hopefully others will too. So I'm ready for coffee because my brain needs it now. Yeah. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. Be sure to follow Hananya at Hananya LeClaire on Instagram and YouTube. Follow Shamim on Instagram at rnpinkhamauthor. And Leslie on Instagram at ld.feral.writer. Or catch all of us on YouTube at 3 Writing Amigas. Until our next hangout, keep on writing.